So I want to start with a story when I was 15 years old, which is related to all of you in this room, which shows how, notwithstanding the vast distances, how peoples can be connected through sheer solidarity, even though, there's so many things that stand in the way quite often. Just over 25 years ago, in 1981, my 14-year-old brother and myself at 15 got up, like many South Africans did, at 4 o'clock in the morning to watch a rugby match. Well, some South Africans woke up to actually watch the rugby match, and some woke up to actually watch the demonstration at the rugby match. And this was a match that took place in Hamilton. And the TV was in my father's room. And my mum had just died the year before, and my dad was very precious about the TV because he didn't want us to abuse it. So we had to knock the door, go in, and my father said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Rugby, we want to watch the rugby." Now, if you told me you want to watch the demonstration, he would have not opened the door. Because parents feared the repression that the children would suffer if they got politicized. So anyway, my brother, who's a year younger than me, but very, very smart, was giving me running commentary, of what was happening. So he said to me, "Yeah, I see all those black-looking people, they're Maori. And you can expect them to be there because they're like us, and of course they're going to support our struggle." And he said, "These white people, I don't know really what's happening with them." Because you can imagine growing up in apartheid South Africa, everything was black and white. And so, very importantly for me as a young activist at that time, the idea that people of different race groups in the language of South Africa at that time could come together in a united way and support us thousands and thousands of miles away was a very, very important early political lesson that my brother and I learned. So I want to say to all of you, and I know in this room there are people who actually participate in these activities, and I want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for that solidarity. The one point I want to connect to yesterday's discussion is the question of definition of civil society. And on a lighter note, when I first started at Civicus, we initiated a program called the Civil Society Index, which in fact we did pilot in New Zealand in 1999. And but before we started that program, we posed a question, in developing the methodology to consult. We said, how would you recognize a healthy civil society if you saw it? Because we wanted to try to get indicators of what would help us measure a healthy civil society. And I remember a very prominent feminist friend of mine who chaired the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Gender Equality in the post-apartheid Parliament in South Africa. She thought this was a rather ridiculous exercise and a waste of time. And she said to me, trying to define a healthy civil society is like trying to define pornography. You might not know the technical definition of pornography, but when you see it, you'll recognize it. And civil society is pretty much like that. But one of the challenges that we need to take away from yesterday's discussion is the question of how much of energy we put into getting a perfect definition, and how much we actually understand that in fact civil society is very often contextually defined. What constitutes civil society, as we heard yesterday, in New Zealand between indigenous and non-indigenous communities is quite different. The civil society in China versus civil society in Jamaica, you're going to have a whole range of differences for all regions. Now, of course, there are commonalities, but it's very important that I think we have to recognize that civil society as a concept is not one unbroken intellectual thread. Because, for example, already during the Scottish Enlightenment in the 18th century, one of the leading theorists there, wrote a pamphlet which you can download on the website. If you just Google an essay on the history of civil society. Now imagine if you're writing at that period during the Scottish Enlightenment, a history of civil society. So the way it has been used over time is very important, that with humility we must actually accept that there is it's not one unbroken intellectual thread. It's been used in different ways, as Michael Edwards very clearly pointed out. However, being a practitioner, I would like to suggest deal with one issue which Terence, in his briefing paper, put to us about the question of civil society and whether it has values. And let me tell it to you in a story again. When I first started at Civicus, I found myself in Birmingham, Alabama, and coming from South Africa, the way the term civil society was introduced into the South African post-liberation experience was not in a value-neutral way. It was understood as collective action for the progressive common good. So I was waxing and waning about civil society being, such a great thing, and an African-American woman got up at the end of it and said, in the question time, "I'm quite disgusted by you." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "How can you, being involved in the liberation struggle, part of Mandela's movement, and all come here and so naively and uncritically wax and wane about civil society? Because where I come from," she quoted your example, Terence, "the Ku Klux Klan is part of civil society." So I said, well, and now for me that was a shock. I'm just making this point about context, that in different contexts it means different things. And the person says, well, the Ku Klux Klan is non-profit, it's non-governmental, it's membership-based, and the members work on a voluntary basis to advance the interests of their organization. And it was quite a shock to me. And the practical recommendation I want to make in dealing with that problem is that I think we can make a distinction between associational life and civil society. So the Ku Klux Klan, in terms of its legal makeup within the US system, might meet certain definitions which will qualify it to be part of associational life. And in Civicus, what we've been trying to do to address this problem in practical terms has been to say, for example, in terms of who can be members of Civicus, we use what we believe to be the most consensual global document, which celebrates its 60th anniversary next year, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So what we would say is that this is a global consensual document, but unfortunately we know many of these global consensual documents, our government signed it in New York, by the time they land back in the capitals, they've forgotten what they've signed, but that's another story. And so the whole question of uncivil civil society gets addressed by saying you cannot exclude people if they meet certain legal definitions in terms of associational life, and they work largely within the law, and if the governments do not prosecute them because they meet their legal obligations. But then I think we have a right to claim that space back, to say that it's actually one where you have to respect tolerance, you have to value diversity, you need to support democracy, gender equality, and so on. While on the topic of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it's probably worth just taking a minute to note that on the 25th of November was another international day, which was the International Day to Stop Violence Against Women, and the 10th of December is the International Human Rights Day. And this period that we are in between the 25th of November and the 10th of December is the 16 days of activism against gender violence. And I would just stop there to say that there are certain challenges that humanity faces where, whether government acts decisively or not, that civil society and citizens being well organized can actually make a huge impact, because there are certain things that are more within our domain of control as citizens. And here, one of the challenges I would throw to all of us is that when we take an issue like violence against women, yes, governments can do things to actually provide leadership. But even in the absence of governmental leadership, I think it's possible for those of us who are men in particular, to recognize that we are either part of the problem or we are part of the solution.